On Mother's Day, my daughter-in-law gave me a bouquet. The card read, "Last flowers before the nursing home." My hands shook. She smiled her perfect smile. I stood up, took the church microphone, and revealed how she was trying to get me to a nursing home. My son and daughter-in-law were in shock as the congregation watched. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My daughter-in-law handed me a bouquet that, at first glance, looked like the perfect Mother's Day gift. Lush pink roses mingled with white lilies, each petal immaculate, the scent warm and sweet. But tucked between the blooms was a small card that made my stomach clench. In neat, deliberate handwriting it read, "Last flowers before the nursing home." I read the words twice, my hands trembling, just enough that the card wavered in my grasp. The sanctuary of Oak Ridge Community Church suddenly felt smaller, warmer, and far more stifling than it had a moment before. I glanced up. There was Heather, my daughter-in-law, standing beside my son, William, her perfectly manicured hand wrapped possessively around his arm. She leaned in to whisper something to him, her lips barely moving, her eyes flicking toward me. When she caught my gaze, she offered a sweet smile. So sweet it almost stung. It wasn't the kind of smile that carried warmth or affection. It was the kind that carried a message. You know exactly what I mean. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't thoughtless humor. It was a warning, maybe even a promise. For 3 years, Heather had been planting seeds in William's mind, casually commenting on how hard it must be for me to keep up my house, wondering aloud if it was safe for me to live alone, suggesting ever so gently that I should look into my options while I still could. Each time, William would nod along, his agreement quiet but visible. He rarely contradicted her, at least not in front of me. I slid the note back into the envelope and tucked it into my purse, forcing my breathing to slow. Pastor Richards was still at the pulpit, delivering the final lines of his sermon on honoring mothers. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Around me, I could hear the soft rustle of families leaning in close to one another, see the genuine affection and pride shining on faces all around. Women smiled, men clasped their wives' hands, children fidgeted in Sunday clothes. I sat alone, my bouquet heavy in my lap. When the sermon ended, Pastor Richards invited people to share words of appreciation for their mothers. One by one they rose, sons, daughters, even grandchildren, speaking with love that brought both tears and laughter to the congregation. William didn't move. Heather kept her hand on his knee, her eyes forward, her scum with the rumble. Her smile tum and polished. Something inside me, something that had been coiled tight for decades, finally gave way. I had spent 65 years making peace, swallowing words that burned in my throat, smoothing over conflicts for the sake of family harmony. But in that moment, I realized peace had already been broken. It just hadn't been my choice until now. I raised my hand. "I'd like to say something," I said. Pastor Richards blinked, surprised, but gave me an encouraging nod and held out the microphone. My hand was steady now. My voice, when it came, was strong. "Thank you for this beautiful service honoring mothers," I began. "Being a mother has been the greatest joy of my life." I locked my gaze on William. He smiled back, but there was uncertainty in it, a flicker of something he couldn't quite hide. Being a mother means protecting your children, even when they're grown. Sometimes it means speaking uncomfortable truths, out of love. I paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Today I received these beautiful flowers with a note that read, "Last flowers before the nursing home." Gasps rippled across the sanctuary. William's face drained of color. "I'm not saying this for sympathy," I continued, my voice gaining momentum. "I'm saying it because for the last 3 years, I have watched my daughter-in-law work, quietly, deliberately, to separate me from my son. I have watched her take control of his finances, his schedule, his relationships. I have stayed silent while she spread lies about my mental health, despite the fact that just last month, my doctor told me I am perfectly healthy." Heather's face twisted in a way I had never seen in public before. She clutched William's arm, leaning in to whisper something fast and sharp. "I am not going to any nursing home," I said firmly, my voice ringing through the sanctuary. "And I will no longer pretend this behavior is acceptable. Families are supposed to lift one another up, not tear each other down." I handed the microphone back to Pastor Richards. His face was a careful mix of shock and compassion. As I walked toward the exit, the silence behind me was almost physical. Some people dropped their gaze to their hymnals. Others met my eyes with something new, respect, maybe even admiration. Behind me, I could hear Heather's voice, smooth and controlled. Charlotte's been so confused lately. This is exactly what we've been worried about. I pushed open the heavy church doors and stepped into the May sunshine. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but for the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. The bouquet I had left behind sat abandoned on the pew. It was still beautiful, but its meaning had been poisoned. 7 days passed, the phone never rang. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling between my hands. Outside, spring rain tapped against the windows of the home I had lived in for 30 years. The home where I had raised William after his father's death. The home Heather wanted me out of. Heather was gone, but her absence didn't feel like peace. It felt like devastation. I need space, she had told me. That was the polite, modern word for it now. Space. A gentle little euphemism for something brutal. Cutting your own mother out of your life. My fingers traced the rim of my teacup, the porcelain cool beneath my touch, as if it could anchor me to a time before Heather existed in our lives. Back then, William would stop by twice a week without fail, sometimes on his way to work, coffee in hand, just to sit with me for a few minutes. We'd talk about anything, everything, and sometimes nothing at all. His projects at the architectural firm, my volunteer hours at the library, or the latest book we had both devoured. There had been an easiness between us then, the kind that only comes after years of truly knowing someone's rhythms, their pauses, their heart. And then she appeared, Heather, with her perfectly highlighted hair, her sleek suits, and her polished title as a marketing executive. At first, I'd been happy for William. After the wreckage of his divorce from Marie, he deserved to find someone who would love him. I wanted that for him, but it didn't take long for the changes to creep in. The casual visits were the first to vanish. Now everything had to be coordinated through Heather. Soon there were missed birthdays, holiday visits that felt hurried and perfunctory, sudden cancellations when I asked to spend time with just my son. Slowly, the boy I had raised, the man I had known so well, began to fade into a stranger who wore my son's face. One afternoon, Heather had looked at me with a smile that was all sweetness on the surface, but laced with something poisonous beneath. "You're smothering him," she said lightly. "He has his own life now. You should find one too." The kitchen clock ticked louder in the silence that followed, each second slicing through me. I told myself I should feel angry, outraged even. But what came instead was a deep, aching sadness, hollow and cold, echoing through me like an empty hallway. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. My heart leapt with a fragile, foolish hope. Maybe it was William. But when I opened the door, it was Margaret Collins from church, standing there with a casserole dish held tight in her hands. "I thought you might need this," she said, her eyes kind but skittish. "Chicken and wild rice." "Thank you, Margaret," I said, taking the warm dish. "Would you like to come in?" She hesitated, glanced over her shoulder toward her car. "I'm afraid I can't stay. Book club meeting." I knew she was lying. The book club met on Thursdays, not Tuesdays. But I only nodded. I understood the way people avoid lingering near uncomfortable truths. As she stepped back, she lowered her voice. "Charlotte, what you did, it was brave. Many of us have noticed how Heather treats you." She stopped as if weighing whether to continue. "But William was at Pastor Richard's office yesterday. He's been saying you're showing signs of confusion, that you've been imagining slights." Her words settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. So this was their strategy. If they could convince people I was unstable, my side of the story would dissolve into nothing. "Did he bring my medical records from Dr. Lawson?" I asked, my voice steady even though my insides felt anything but. "The results from my checkup last month, the ones that showed I'm perfectly healthy?" Margaret looked down. "Charlotte, no one wants to take sides." I gave her a thin smile. "Thank you for the casserole," I said quietly, beginning to close the door. "Give my regards to the book club that isn't meeting today." When she left, I placed the untouched casserole in the refrigerator and returned to my now cold tea. My hand went instinctively to my purse, to where I'd been keeping Heather's cruel note, my only solid piece of evidence. I opened the purse and a chill passed through me. The note was gone. Panic rising, I dumped the contents onto the table, searching through every pocket, every fold. Nothing. Someone must have taken it, likely while I'd left my purse unattended in the pew during my speech at church. Without that note, it would be my word against Heather's. And then another realization struck, one that stole the air from my lungs. William still had medical power of attorney for me. Years ago, after a short hospital stay, I'd signed it over without a second thought. He was my son. My trust had been absolute. Now that same trust felt like a weapon aimed straight at me. Heather had once joked about putting me in a nursing home. I dismissed it as spite. Now I wasn't so sure it was a joke at all. With William's legal authority and Heather's talent for manipulation, they could carry out that plan, whether I agreed or not. Outside, the rain began to pound harder, tapping against the roof like restless fingers. My home, my sanctuary, no longer felt secure. I was alone, I was being painted as unstable, and I was facing the terrifying possibility of losing my independence entirely. That night, as darkness settled in, I made myself a simple dinner. I barely tasted it. The quiet in the house pressed against me, heavy and relentless. There was no call from William, no apology, no reassurance. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text, not from him, from a number I didn't know. "Charlotte, it's Diane from the church choir. I saw what happened on Sunday. I've been through something similar. Call me if you want to talk. You're not alone." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a tiny spark of hope flicker to life in the cold darkness. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone after all. It took me 2 full days before I dialed her number. Something about making that call felt like stepping over a threshold I couldn't uncross. Reaching out meant admitting something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Life had spiraled far beyond anything I could manage. Days blurred together, swallowed by confusion, fear, and the gnawing ache of betrayal. But when William's silence stretched into a second full week, something inside me shifted. I knew I couldn't keep carrying this alone. I needed someone who would understand, not just listen politely, but truly get it. We met at Rosie's Diner, a tiny, out-of-the-way place tucked near the edge of town, the kind of spot where the smell of fried bacon clung to the curtains and no one hurried you to leave. Most importantly, it was far enough from church that the chance of running into familiar faces was close to zero. Diane arrived before me. She was a few years older, her silver hair cut into a neat, stylish bob that made her look quietly confident. Her eyes, soft but shadowed by years of weathering storms, met mine as I slid into the booth. She stirred her coffee slowly, the metal spoon clicking against the cup. "I wasn't sure you'd call," she said finally. "Most people don't. They try to handle it on their own." "Handle what exactly?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "Elder abuse," she said plainly, without flinching. "Emotional manipulation, isolation. What your daughter-in-law is doing, it's textbook." Her words dropped into me like stones falling into still water, spreading ripples of truth I'd been avoiding. I had been so consumed by the sharp personal pain of William's betrayal that I hadn't stopped to put a name to the wider cruelty happening around me. "My daughter did the same thing," Diane went on, her voice steady but laced with an old hurt. "It started with little comments, small jabs about my memory, like they were just teasing. Then she took over my finances, saying it was just to help. Before I even realized, I was in a care facility, staring at the walls and wondering how my life had been taken out from under me. My hands tightened around my coffee cup, the ceramic warming my palms. "How did you get out?" A faint smile touched her lips. "I met Greta. She runs a support group for seniors dealing with family estrangement and abuse. She helped me understand my rights, showed me where to find resources. Most importantly, she helped me see I wasn't alone." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and slid it across the table. "We meet Thursdays at the community center. No pressure, but it might help." I slipped the card into my pocket, neither committing nor refusing, just holding the possibility. "There's something else you should know," Diane said, leaning in slightly, her voice lower now. "Heather's been talking. She's telling people at church you've been acting erratically for months, that the Mother's Day incident was just the latest episode." My stomach dropped, and I nodded, though I could barely find my voice. "And people believe her," Diane added. "Some do. She's convincing. And William?" She paused, her gaze steady on mine. "William supports everything she says." The words landed like a fresh wound. My own son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was just 10, was helping to tear apart my reputation, and with it, my independence. What does she want? I whispered, though my mind was already circling the answer. Your house, probably your savings. Control, Diane said, her tone unwavering. They usually want something tangible. The psychological warfare, that's just the means to an end. My thoughts went to my modest three-bedroom home, bought with the life insurance money after my husband's death. It wasn't extravagant, but it sat in a good neighborhood where property values had tripled over the years. And then there was the small inheritance from my parents, which I had guarded carefully all this time. The air between us grew heavy. I should go, I said suddenly, overwhelmed. Thank you for the coffee. Thursday, 2 p.m., she called after me as I stood. Just think about it. The following Thursday, I drove to the community center, a plain brick building that looked tired and worn from years of service. I parked out front and sat in the driver's seat for 15 full minutes, my hands resting uselessly on the steering wheel, debating whether to go inside. Through the front window, I saw a room just off the main hallway. A small circle of chairs was being set up. An older woman with a bright red scarf bustled around, placing bottles of water and a plate of cookies on a low table. Finally, with a deep breath, I pushed the door open and walked in. You must be Charlotte, the woman in the scarf said immediately, her handshake warm and firm, her eyes meeting mine without hesitation. Diane mentioned you might come. We're just getting started. There were 8 others seated in the circle, men and women ranging from their 60s to their 80s. Their faces told stories even before they spoke, lines carved by pain, but also etched with resilience and a quiet strength I realized I desperately needed. One by one, they shared their stories. The son who quietly took control of his mother's finances until she had no access to her own money. The daughter who convinced doctors her father was incompetent so she could sell his farm. The grandson who cut his grandmother off from friends and family, leaving her isolated and dependent. Something shifted inside me. This wasn't just my nightmare. I wasn't some anomaly who had brought this on herself. What was happening to me was a pattern, recognizable, predictable, and most importantly, something that could be fought. When my turn came, I began haltingly, my voice uncertain. But as I spoke, describing Heather's deliberate campaign and William's complicity, the words came steadier, stronger. I admitted the fear that had been swallowing me whole. The medical power of attorney, that's concerning, Greta said when I finished. But it's fixable. We have a volunteer lawyer who helps members with exactly these issues. And in the meantime, we'll get you connected with resources to document your mental competency independently. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope flickered in me, not just for surviving, but for reclaiming what was mine. When the meeting ended, people exchanged phone numbers and warm hugs. An elderly man named Thomas pressed a small book into my hands, a guide to elder rights and legal protections. Knowledge is power, he said simply, and you're stronger than you think. Walking back to my car, I felt it. The fear hadn't vanished. It was still there, curling cold in my stomach. But next to it, something new had taken root. I refused to let myself be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to just endure. I was going to fight. The morning after my first support group meeting, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. It was as though a heavy fog of confusion and hurt had finally lifted, replaced by a steady sense of purpose that pushed me out of bed even before the sun rose. My first call was to Dr. Lawson, my physician for over 20 years. Charlotte, he greeted warmly, what can I do for you? I need a full, comprehensive cognitive assessment, I said, skipping any small talk. And I need the results formally documented. There was a brief pause on the other end. May I ask why? I told him everything about Heather's subtle manipulations, William's control through the power of attorney, and the ugly rumors circulating about my mental state. As I spoke, I could hear his voice growing more serious, his concern deepening with each detail. Come in this afternoon, he said at last. We'll begin the process right away. My next call was to Sandra Boyd, the volunteer attorney Greta had recommended. She listened with a calm patience as I laid out my situation in full. Her questions were sharp and deliberate about my assets, my legal paperwork, the dynamics within my family. This is, unfortunately, not uncommon, she said when I finished. But we have options. The first step is to revoke that power of attorney. Then we'll draft new advance directives, appointing someone you can truly trust as your agent. I don't have anyone, I admitted quietly, the words stinging as I spoke them aloud. You will, Sandra assured me gently. That's one of the reasons your support group is so important. It's a place to start building a circle of people who genuinely have your best interests at heart. By the end of that week, I had completed the cognitive testing. Results? Excellent. I revoked William's power of attorney and filed a formal letter with my bank, requiring my in-person verification for any large withdrawals or account changes. But the most transformative change came in a way I hadn't anticipated. After our second support group meeting, Greta approached me holding a flyer. The community center is looking for a part-time mentor for their intergenerational program, she said. Seniors working with teens after school. I thought of you immediately. Me? I asked, startled. I haven't worked since I retired from teaching 5 years ago. Exactly, Greta replied with a knowing smile. You have the experience with young people, and you have the time. And, she added, her voice softening, it might be good for you to start building a life outside of William and Heather's shadow. The program was housed in a bright, welcoming room at the community center. The walls were alive with colorful artwork, and shelves overflowed with books and resources. 5 other seniors already volunteered there, helping teens with everything from algebra homework to college essays, or simply being the kind of adult who would actually listen. Maria Santos, the program director, greeted me warmly. We especially need help with our creative writing program, she explained. Many of our teens struggle to put their thoughts into words, and having a supportive adult guide them can make all the difference. I thought back to my years teaching English, to the joy of watching students discover their own voices. I think I can help with that, I told her. That afternoon, I met Zoe, a quiet 16-year-old with hair the color of summer skies and eyes that carried a weight far too heavy for her age. I hate writing, she announced the moment we sat down. That's okay, I replied easily. We can just talk instead. By the time our session ended, she had filled 3 notebook pages with a fierce, thoughtful rant about her school's unfair dress code. She didn't even realize she'd been writing until she looked down at her hand. Same time next week? She asked, pretending to sound casual. I'll be here, I promised. Weeks passed and my days began to settle into a new rhythm. Mornings were for the practical matters, meeting with Sandra, sorting out my finances, collecting proof of my independence and capability through photos, receipts, and a meticulous daily journal. Afternoons were for the community center, where 5 regular students now counted on me enough to look disappointed if I missed a day. Evenings, which had once felt unbearably lonely, became the time for new pursuits. I joined a beginner's computer class at the library, determined to learn to navigate the digital world that had always intimidated me. Thomas from the support group introduced me to his community garden, where I discovered the quiet satisfaction of coaxing vegetables from the earth. I still thought about William every single day. The ache of missing him never really faded. Twice I had driven past his architectural firm, hoping to catch even a fleeting glimpse, wondering if he ever thought of me with the same lingering ache. But the raw anger I'd once felt was softening, replaced by something more complicated, a bittersweet understanding that I had to build a life not dependent on his presence. Then, a month after Mother's Day, my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Mom, we need to talk. Christmas dinner at our house. William. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. After weeks of silence, after the hurt, the betrayal, the empty spaces where our connection used to be, here was his voice, arriving not as a plea or an apology, but as a demand disguised as an invitation. The invitation had arrived 6 months in advance, delivered as if the past had been erased, as if nothing at all had happened between us. My fingers trembled slightly over the phone screen as I typed out a response, my mind torn between habit and hard-earned wisdom. Before pressing send, I hesitated. The old Charlotte, the one who spent years yearning for scraps of her son's attention, would have replied immediately, thankful for even the smallest gesture. But the woman I had become knew something vital now. I deserved more than crumbs. I stared at the unfinished message for a moment longer, then quietly erased it and set my phone aside. This wasn't a decision I needed to make today, or even this week. I had time to think about what was truly best for me, not simply what would make William happy or keep Heather satisfied. Right now, my focus was elsewhere. Seeds waited to be planted in the community garden. My teens at the writing workshop needed lesson plans. And tonight, friends, real friends, were coming over for dinner. Friends who saw me clearly, who valued me for exactly who I was. The woman I was becoming would know how to answer William when the moment was right. The months between Mother's Day and Christmas blurred into a season of movement and quiet transformation. By December, my life had changed in ways I could never have predicted. The community center had hired me part-time to oversee their newly expanded writing program. My small garden plot had produced more vegetables than I could eat, enough to share with neighbors and friends. Encouraged by my computer class instructor, I had even started a modest blog about senior independence. Still, William's message stayed with me. I thought about it almost every day, turning it over in my mind like a smooth stone, weighing it from every angle. And after many months and long talks with my support group, I finally decided I would accept his Christmas invitation. But I would do so on my terms. The morning of the visit arrived cold and clear, with a light snowfall dusting the ground like powdered sugar. I dressed with deliberate care, a deep burgundy sweater, charcoal slacks, and my mother's pearl necklace, a quiet piece of armor for whatever lay ahead. Inside my purse rested a folder containing my full neurological evaluation, legal documents officially revoking William's power of attorney, and photographs showing my active, independent life. As I pulled into William and Heather's driveway, my grip on the steering wheel tightened, hands trembling again, this time from a different kind of anticipation. Their home was extravagantly decorated for Christmas, lights outlining every eave, a giant inflatable Santa nodding cheerfully in the front yard. It was festive, excessive, so very Heather. William opened the door before I could knock. He looked tired, I noticed, lines etched deeper around his eyes than I remembered. "Mom," he said, his voice formal, "come in?" The smell of pine and cinnamon filled the air, Christmas carols drifting softly from the hidden speakers. He led me into the living room where Heather sat poised on the sofa in a deep green velvet dress, perfectly matching the towering tree behind her. "Charlotte," she said, her smile tight and practiced, "so glad you could make it." I took a seat in the armchair across from them, noting the careful distance they both kept. No hugs, no warmth, just polite, chilly formality. "It's been a long time," I said evenly. William cleared his throat. "Mom, before we have dinner, we wanted to talk to you about what happened in May." He glanced at Heather, who gave him a little nod of encouragement. "Your behavior at church was concerning," he continued. "We've been worried about you." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "My behavior? You mean when I responded to being told I was headed for a nursing home?" Heather let out a dramatic sigh. "Exactly. You completely misinterpreted a lighthearted note. It was just a silly joke." "A joke?" I repeated, reaching into my purse. "Like the way you've been telling people I'm confused, having episodes, losing my grip on reality?" William shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, we're concerned about your mental health, that's all. Fortunately, I have excellent doctors." I cut in smoothly, pulling out the folder and placing it on the coffee table. "Dr. Lawson conducted a full neurological and cognitive evaluation in June. The results are right here, if you'd like to see them. Perfect scores in every category." William didn't reach for the folder. Heather's smile faltered. "We've also noticed you've been making some questionable financial decisions," William pressed on, as if following a rehearsed script. "We thought it might be time to simplify things, maybe sell the house, move somewhere with more support." "William," I said gently but firmly, "I've revoked your medical power of attorney, and I've placed additional security measures on all my financial accounts." The silence that followed was thick, almost heavy. Heather's face flushed crimson. "You've what?" she demanded. "I've taken back control of my life," I answered, my voice calm, almost serene. "And I'm here today to tell you that while I still love you, William, I will not be manipulated or pushed aside." Heather shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous, William. Tell her this is ridiculous." But William wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his expression hard to read. Surprise, yes, but maybe something else too, something like reluctant respect. "There's something else you should know," I continued, steady in my seat. I had just been hired as the creative writing program coordinator at the community center. Only a week earlier, the local paper had interviewed me about our intergenerational initiatives. That's wonderful, Mom," William said, and for once, the surprise in his voice sounded genuine. Heather, however, didn't share his enthusiasm. "A little part-time charity work doesn't mean you're capable of—" "I'm not finished," I cut in, locking eyes with her. I let my words hang for a heartbeat, then continued. I'm also being considered for a speaking role at next month's conference on active aging. They're particularly interested in my perspective on family dynamics and elder independence. Heather's eyes went wide. You wouldn't dare speak publicly about... About what, Heather? I asked with practiced innocence. About how families sometimes confuse independence with incapacity? About how even the most well-meaning relatives can quietly undermine a senior's autonomy? Oh, it's all very academic, of course. The words were calm, but the warning beneath them was razor sharp. If they kept pushing, I would not stay silent. William's hand came down gently but firmly on Heather's arm. I think we should have dinner now, he said, voice steady. Mom's right. We need to respect her independence. Heather's mouth opened, then shut again without sound. Her cheeks flushed as she spun on her heel and stormed into the kitchen. Dinner that night was taught with unspoken words. Heather kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, as though reducing it to nothing could somehow help her swallow the situation. William tried to bridge the silence, asking about my garden, about my computer classes, questions asked in the tentative tone of someone speaking to a stranger they were only beginning to understand. Later, as I drove home, the snow danced in my headlights, each flake glinting briefly before vanishing into the dark. I felt a strange mix of sadness and quiet triumph. My relationship with my son had shifted, perhaps forever, but I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth, and for the first time in years, they had actually heard me. A year after the Mother's Day that had changed everything, I stood in my living room, surrounded by bright balloons and the warm hum of friendly voices. My 66th birthday was in full swing, a celebration I had planned entirely on my own, inviting the people who had become my chosen family over the past 12 months. Greta was by the window, laughing with Thomas as they debated the merits of different tomato varieties for our community garden. Maria from the community center was proudly passing around photos of our teen writer's newly published anthology. Zoe, my blue-haired writing student, now streaked with purple, was arranging a plate of cupcakes she'd baked herself, each topped with a tiny fondant book. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and stopped. The woman staring back stood straighter than she had a year ago. Her eyes shone brighter, her smile more open. She looked happy. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, my breath caught. William was standing on my porch, alone, a small wrapped package in his hands. Hi, Mom, he said softly. Happy birthday. For a moment, my voice wouldn't come. It had been nearly 4 months since our tense Christmas dinner. Our only contact since then reduced to a handful of stiff, polite text. William, I managed at last. I wasn't expecting you. He shifted his weight, glancing past me. I should have called first. I can see you're having a party. No, it's fine. Please come in. As I led him inside, I could feel the moment my friends registered who had arrived. Greta caught my eye and gave me a discreet nod of support. Zoe, who had heard more than a few stories about my son during our writing sessions, watched him with open curiosity. Your house looks different, William said, taking in the room. It's nice. He was right. Over the past year, I had reshaped not only my life but my home, painting the walls in warm shades of yellow and blue, swapping heavy drapes for soft, light-filtering blinds, lining the walls with bookshelves for my ever-growing poetry and memoir collection. Thank you, I said. Would you like something to drink? There's punch and coffee. Coffee would be great. In the kitchen, away from curious eyes, William set the package down on the counter and took a breath. Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one. I busied myself pouring his coffee, not sure how to respond. Heather and I are separated, he went on, voice low. Have been for about 2 months now. I turned to look at him, surprised. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be, he said, giving a small, sad smile. It was a long time coming. After Christmas, I started to see things more clearly. The way she talked about you, the way she tried to control everything. I realized it wasn't just about you, it was about me, too. I handed him the coffee. Our fingers brushed briefly. What happened? William ran a hand through his hair. I found some emails. She'd been in touch with a real estate agent, getting estimates on your house, talking about quick sale options. She even had draft documents drawn up that would have given us power over your assets. She somehow thought I could convince you to sign them. The words should have shocked me, but after everything that had happened, they only confirmed what I had already known deep down. It confirmed what I had long suspected. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it, William continued, his voice steady but edged with something sharp. She just said it was for your own good, that I needed to man up and deal with my mother myself. That was the moment I knew I had to leave. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cool surface pressing into my back as I tried to absorb his words. 100 thoughts crowded my mind, but the only thing I could manage was, I'm sorry it came to this, William. No, he said, shaking his head. I'm the one who should be sorry, Mom. I let her come between us. I believed her when she told me you were slipping. Even though everything I actually knew about you contradicted that, I believed her anyway. I failed you. That simple admission, the acknowledgement of a truth I had waited so painfully long to hear, felt like a key turning in a lock so old and rusted I'd almost forgotten it existed. I've missed you, he said, his voice catching slightly. I've missed my mom. Before I could speak, Zoe appeared in the doorway. Charlotte, everyone's waiting for you to blow out your candles, she announced, her eyes flicking toward William with a flicker of suspicion. I'll be right there, I promised. Then I turned back to William. Will you stay? He hesitated. Are you sure this is your day with your friends? I don't want to intrude. You won't be intruding, I told him gently. But things are different now. I'm different. I can see that, he said after a pause, and there was something in his voice, something like genuine admiration. You seem stronger, happier. I am, I admitted with quiet certainty. I've built a life I love, William. A life that's mine. If you want to be part of it, I'd welcome that, but it has to be on terms of mutual respect. He nodded slowly, letting the weight of my words settle between us. I understand, he said, and I want to try. When we rejoined the party, I introduced William to my friends, watching as he made a real effort to connect with the people who had come to mean so much to me. When Thomas shared a story about our community garden mishaps, William laughed openly. When Maria talked about the teen writing program, he asked thoughtful questions that showed he was listening. And when Zoe reluctantly, almost begrudgingly, admitted she wanted to study architecture in college, his face lit up, and he offered to show her some of his firm's projects someday. Later, after the candles had been blown out and the gifts unwrapped, I found myself standing on the back porch with William, watching as the sunset spilled brilliant oranges and soft pinks across the evening sky. Your present? He said suddenly, remembering the small package he had set aside earlier. You never opened it. I carefully peeled back the wrapping paper to find a silver picture frame. Inside was a faded photograph I hadn't seen in years. Me holding 5-year-old William on my lap, both of us leaning over a picture book, caught mid-laughter at something now lost to time. I found it while I was packing my things, he explained. It reminded me of who we used to be, who we could be again. Maybe. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertips, a tightness building in my throat. I'd like that, I said at last. But it will take time. I have time, he replied simply. As the first stars began to puncture the deepening sky, my thoughts drifted back over the past year. The path from humiliation to liberation, from isolation to belonging, from fear to a quiet, unshakable strength. That Mother's Day bouquet, which had once symbolized such calculated cruelty, had become the unlikely spark that ignited my transformation. I had lost the comfort of blind trust, yes, but in its place I had gained something far more precious, self-reliance, true friendship, and a sense of purpose that no one could strip away from me. And maybe, just maybe, I was gaining back a son who could finally see me as I really was. Happy birthday, Mom, William said softly beside me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, it truly was.